Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in Millbrook High School. While her classmates wore trendy sneakers and designer boots, Sarah walked the hallways in a pair of worn military-style combat boots that had seen better days. The leather was scuffed, the laces were frayed, and the soles showed signs of countless miles walked. To everyone around her, they were just ugly old boots that didn't belong in their polished suburban world. The whispers followed her everywhere. In the cafeteria, groups of students would point and giggle when she passed by. "Look at those ancient things," Madison Cooper would say, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Did she find them at a thrift store or something? The laughter that followed always made Sarah's cheeks burn, but she kept walking with her head held high, her boots making a distinctive sound against the polished linoleum floors. Sarah was 17 years old, a junior who had transferred to Millbrook just 6 months earlier when her family moved from a small military town in Texas. The adjustment had been difficult in ways she never expected. Back home, everyone understood military families. Here, in this affluent suburb outside Chicago, she felt like an outsider looking in on a world she didn't quite understand. Her father, Sergeant Major Robert Martinez, had been deployed overseas for the past year. Her mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the local hospital to make ends meet while her husband served his country. Sarah understood the sacrifices her family made, but explaining that to her new classmates felt impossible. How could she tell them that her boots weren't just fashion choices, but connections to something deeper than they could imagine? The boots had belonged to her older brother, Miguel, who had enlisted in the Army straight out of high school 3 years earlier. Miguel had worn them during his basic training at Fort Benning, through his deployment to Afghanistan, and during countless training exercises that prepared him for the dangers he would face overseas. When he came home on leave, those boots had walked through their front door, carrying him back to safety and family. Sarah remembered the day Miguel had given her the boots. It was a warm September afternoon, and he was preparing to return to his base after a 2-week leave. She had been sitting on the front porch, dreading his departure and feeling the familiar ache that came with military goodbyes. "Hey, little sister," Miguel had said, sitting down beside her. "I want you to have something." He had pulled off his boots and set them in front of her. "These have walked me through some tough times, and I think they might help you too." Sarah had protested, saying the boots were too big, too masculine, too military for a teenage girl. But Miguel had insisted. "Sometimes," he had told her, "we need something to remind us where we come from and what we're fighting for. These boots know about courage, about standing strong when everything around you is falling apart." Now, walking through the halls of Millbrook High, Sarah understood what her brother meant. Every step in those boots reminded her of the strength that ran in her family, the courage that had been passed down through generations of service members who had faced far greater challenges than high school social hierarchies. The mockery wasn't limited to casual hallway encounters. In her English class, when students were asked to share something meaningful about themselves, several classmates made jokes about Sarah's vintage military surplus style. During gym class, when everyone changed into athletic shoes, the comments about her boots became even more pointed. "Seriously, Sarah," said Jennifer Walsh, the class president and unofficial queen bee of their grade, "those boots are like really bringing down the whole aesthetic of our school. Maybe someone should start a fundraiser to get you some normal shoes." The group of girls around Jennifer laughed, and Sarah felt that familiar burning sensation in her chest. She wanted to tell them about Miguel, about the places those boots had been, about the courage they represented. Instead, she tied her gym shoes tighter and focused on the volleyball net across the gymnasium. Sarah's mother had noticed the change in her daughter's mood since starting at the new school. Elena Martinez was a woman who had learned to be strong in the face of uncertainty, having spent years as a military wife supporting her husband through multiple deployments while raising 2 children largely on her own. She recognized the signs of her daughter's struggle, but also knew that some battles had to be fought independently. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table working on homework, Elena approached the subject carefully. "How are things going at school, mija?" she asked, using the Spanish endearment that had always made Sarah feel safe. "It's fine, Mom," Sarah replied, not looking up from her textbook. But Elena could see the tension in her daughter's shoulders, the way she held her pen too tightly, the slight frown that had become permanent over the past few weeks. "You know," Elena said, sitting down across from her, "when your father was first stationed at Fort Campbell, I felt like I didn't fit in with the other military wives. They all seemed to know things I didn't, had connections I couldn't make. It took time to find my place. Sarah looked up then, seeing something in her mother's eyes that she had never noticed before. How did you get through it? I remembered what your grandmother used to tell me, Elena said. She would say that sometimes the things that make us different are the very things that make us strong. Those boots you wear every day? They're not just shoes, Sarah. They're a reminder of who you are and where you come from. That night, Sarah sat on her bed looking at the boots that had caused so much trouble. In the quiet of her room, she could almost hear Miguel's voice telling her about the places they had been together. She remembered him describing the dusty roads of Afghanistan, the weight of his pack during long marches, the comfort he found in the familiar feel of worn leather against his feet during the most difficult moments of his deployment. The next morning brought another round of whispered comments and pointed stares, but Sarah found herself standing a little straighter. During lunch, she chose to sit alone rather than endure the subtle exclusion she had been experiencing at various tables. As she ate her sandwich, she overheard Madison Cooper talking loudly about the upcoming homecoming dance. I can't even imagine what Sarah would wear, Madison said, glancing over at Sarah's table. Probably those awful boots with some thrift store dress. Someone should really talk to her about updating her look. The group around Madison erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of embarrassment. But this time, something else rose up alongside the hurt. She thought about Miguel facing enemy fire in those boots, about her father walking patrol in similar footwear halfway around the world, about generations of service members who had worn military boots not for fashion, but for survival. After lunch, Sarah found herself in the school library, drawn to the computer terminals, where she began researching military service and the meaning behind the equipment that soldiers carried. She read about the significance of military boots, about the traditions surrounding them, about the ways they connected service members to something larger than themselves. She discovered stories of soldiers who had walked hundreds of miles in their boots, who had stood guard through long nights, who had carried wounded comrades to safety while wearing footwear designed not for style, but for endurance and protection. The more she read, the more she understood that Miguel's gift had been about more than just old boots. That afternoon, walking home from school, Sarah noticed an elderly man working in his front yard. His movements were careful and deliberate, and something about his posture reminded her of her grandfather who had served in Vietnam. As she approached, the man looked up and smiled. "Those are some serious boots you've got there, young lady," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence she had learned to associate with military veterans. Sarah stopped, surprised by the acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "Vietnam, 1971. The man said, pointing to Sarah's feet. "Had a pair just like those. Walked me through some of the worst and best times of my life." He extended his hand. "Frank Richardson, Sergeant First Class, retired." "Sarah Martinez," she replied, shaking his weathered hand. "My brother served in Afghanistan." Frank's expression shifted to something deeper, more understanding. "Those his boots?" "Yes, sir." "Then you're wearing them for the right reasons," Frank said. "Not everyone will understand, but the right people will always recognize what those boots represent." As Sarah continued her walk home, Frank's words echoed in her mind. For the first time since starting at Millbrook High, she felt like someone had truly seen her, had understood the significance of what she carried with her every day. That evening, Sarah's mother received a phone call from overseas. Robert Martinez's voice crackled through the international connection, bringing news that would change everything for their small family. Miguel's unit had been involved in an incident during a routine patrol. He had been injured while helping evacuate civilians from a building that had come under attack. Elena's face went pale as she listened to her husband's careful explanation. Miguel was alive but wounded, currently receiving treatment at a military hospital in Germany before being transferred back to the United States. The details were still emerging, but Robert wanted his family to know that their son was being recommended for recognition of his heroic actions. When Sarah saw her mother's expression after the phone call ended, she knew immediately that something had happened. The conversation that followed was filled with tears, worry, and an overwhelming mixture of pride and fear that comes with loving someone who serves in dangerous places. "He's coming home," Elena told her daughter. "Miguel is coming home, but he's hurt. Your father says he saved lives, Sarah. He put himself in danger to help others, and now he's being honored for it. And Sarah felt her world shift in that moment. The boots on her feet suddenly felt heavier, more significant than ever before. They had carried her brother through the very mission that had led to his injury and his heroism. They had been there when he made the choice to risk everything for others. Over the next several days, as the family prepared for Miguel's return, Sarah found herself looking at her classmates differently. Their concerns about fashion and social status seemed smaller somehow, less important in the context of what her brother had experienced and sacrificed. The whispers about her boots continued. But Sarah began to hear them differently. Each comment reminded her of Miguel's courage, of her father's ongoing service, of the long line of family members who had worn similar boots in service to their country. Instead of feeling ashamed, she began to feel connected to something larger and more meaningful than high school social dynamics. One morning, as she was getting ready for school, Sarah found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, really looking at the boots for the first time in weeks. She could see the scuff marks that told stories of miles walked, the worn spots that spoke of long days and difficult terrain, the careful repairs that Miguel had made to extend their life. She thought about all the ground those boots had covered, all the challenges they had helped Miguel face, all the moments of fear and courage they had witnessed. In that reflection, Sarah began to understand that wearing them wasn't about fashion or fitting in. It was about carrying a piece of her brother's strength with her, about honoring the sacrifice and service that had shaped her family for generations. As she walked to school that morning, Sarah's steps carried a different energy. The familiar sound of her boots against the pavement seemed louder, more purposeful. She wasn't trying to hide anymore, or blend in with classmates who would never understand the weight of what she carried. When she entered the building and heard the first whispered comment about her footwear, Sarah didn't feel the usual sting of embarrassment. Instead, she felt a quiet pride rising in her chest. These boots had walked through places her classmates couldn't imagine, had stood firm when everything around them was chaos, had carried someone she loved through the most challenging moments of his life. The day passed with the usual mixture of classes, assignments, and social navigation that defined high school life. But something had changed in Sarah's perspective. She found herself paying less attention to the comments about her appearance and more attention to the lessons being taught, the relationships being formed, the opportunities to make a positive impact on her new environment. During her final class of the day, American History, the teacher announced that they would be starting a unit on modern military conflicts and their impact on American society. As Mrs. Henderson began discussing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but this time it was mixed with anticipation rather than dread. For the first time since transferring to Millbrook High, Sarah had knowledge and perspective that her classmates lacked. She understood the reality of military service, the sacrifice of families left behind, the courage required to face danger for the sake of others. Her boots suddenly felt not like sources of shame, but like credentials that gave her authority to speak about things that mattered. As the bell rang and students began filing out of the classroom, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was still the girl with the worn military boots, still the outsider from a different world. But now she understood that being different wasn't a weakness to be hidden. It was a strength to be claimed and shared with a world that needed to understand the cost and meaning of service. Walking toward her locker, Sarah's boots echoed through the hallway with a sound she was beginning to recognize as powerful rather than embarrassing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to stand firm in the face of misunderstanding. But tonight, she would go home and wait for news about Miguel's recovery, knowing that with every step, she was honoring the courage that ran in her family and the boots that had carried that courage through the most difficult places on earth. 3 weeks after receiving news about Miguel's injury, the Martinez family received word that he would be arriving at Walter Reed Medical Center for continued treatment and rehabilitation. Elena had taken leave from her job at the hospital, and Sarah was excused from school for several days to travel with her mother to Washington, D.C., to be with Miguel during his recovery. The reunion at the medical center was emotional in ways Sarah had not anticipated. Miguel looked different than she remembered. He was thinner, his eyes carried a weight that hadn't been there before, and his left arm was in a complex brace that spoke to the severity of his injuries. But when he saw Sarah wearing his boots, his face lit up with a smile that reminded her of the brother who had given them to her. "Still wearing those old things, I see," Miguel said as Sarah approached his hospital bed carefully. not wanting to disturb the various medical equipment surrounding him. "Every day," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "They've been keeping me strong." Miguel's expression grew serious as he looked down at the boots. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about those boots. Something I should have mentioned before I gave them to you." Elena looked up from where she was arranging flowers on Miguel's bedside table, sensing the importance of whatever her son was about to share. "Remember how I told you they'd walked me through tough times?" Miguel continued. "There's more to that story than I let on. The day I got injured, the day they're saying I did something heroic, those boots were the only reason I could keep going when everything went wrong." Sarah sat down in the chair beside his bed, listening intently as Miguel began to describe the events that had led to his injury and commendation. His unit had been conducting a routine patrol in a village outside Kandahar when they received reports of civilians trapped in a building that had been damaged during fighting between coalition forces and insurgents. "The building was unstable," Miguel explained, his voice becoming distant as he recalled the events. "Command wanted us to wait for specialized rescue equipment, but we could hear voices inside, kids crying. We knew that if we waited, people were going to die." Miguel had volunteered to enter the building with 2 other soldiers to assess the situation and begin evacuation procedures. The structure was severely damaged, with debris blocking most exits and the constant threat of further collapse. For 3 hours, the team worked to extract trapped civilians, moving carefully through unstable passages and carrying injured people to safety. "On my last trip into the building, I was carrying a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old," Miguel continued. "She was unconscious, and I could barely see through all the dust and smoke. The only thing that kept me moving forward was the feel of those boots against the ground, the way they gripped when everything else was sliding and falling apart." As Miguel was making his way toward the exit with the child, a section of the ceiling collapsed behind him, blocking his planned route. With the building continuing to deteriorate and the girl's condition growing more critical, he had to find an alternate path through an area that engineers later determined was structurally unsound. "I was scared, Sarah. More scared than I'd ever been in my life. But every step I took in those boots reminded me of home, of you and Mom and Dad, of all the reasons I was there in the first place. They kept me grounded when everything around me was chaos." Miguel successfully evacuated the child, who survived her injuries, and was reunited with her family. However, as he was exiting the building, the remaining structure finally gave way. A piece of falling debris struck his left shoulder and arm, causing the injuries that had brought him to Walter Reed. In total, Miguel and his team had rescued 12 civilians from the collapsed building, including 4 children. As Sarah listened to her brother's account, she felt a new understanding of the boots she wore every day. They weren't just military equipment or symbols of service. They had literally carried her brother through one of the most important moments of his life, had been his connection to stability and purpose during a situation that could have easily resulted in panic or retreat. "There's something else," Miguel said, reaching under his pillow and pulling out a small, heart-shaped medal with a purple ribbon. "This came yesterday. They're calling what we did that day heroic, but honestly, I was just trying to get home to you guys." Sarah stared at the purple heart in her brother's hand, understanding immediately that this medal represented not just his injury, but his courage under the most extreme circumstances. She thought about all the times her classmates had mocked the boots, all the moments she had felt embarrassed by their appearance, all the opportunities she had missed to help people understand what military service really meant. "Miguel," she said quietly, "would you mind if I took this back to school with me? Not to show off, but to help people understand?" Miguel looked at his sister carefully, seeing something in her expression that spoke to her growing maturity and sense of purpose. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah explained the situation at Millbrook High, the constant comments about her boots, the way she had been treated as an outsider because of her family's military background. She talked about her American history class and the upcoming unit on modern military conflicts, about her sense that her classmates needed to understand the reality of military service beyond what they saw in movies or video games. "I want to share your story," Sarah said. "Not for attention or sympathy, but because people need to know what those boots have really been through, what they represent." Elena had been listening to the conversation with growing pride in both of her children. She saw in Sarah's request a maturation that went beyond typical teenage concerns, a desire to use her brother's experience to educate and inform, rather than simply to defend herself against social pressure. Miguel was quiet for several minutes, considering his sister's request. The Purple Heart represented one of the most difficult experiences of his life, but he also understood that sharing that experience might help others appreciate the sacrifice and service of military members and their families. "Okay," he said finally, "but with one condition. I want you to understand that this medal isn't really mine. It belongs to everyone who was there that day, everyone who supported the mission, everyone who makes the choice to serve despite the risks. If you're going to share this story, make sure people understand that heroism isn't about individual glory, it's about service to others." The next day, Sarah and Elena prepared to return to Chicago. Before leaving the medical center, Sarah spent time with Miguel learning more details about his service, his experiences overseas, and the meaning behind military traditions and symbols. She wanted to be able to speak with authority about the realities of military life when she returned to school. Miguel also taught her how to properly attach the Purple Heart to her boot, showing her a small metal loop near the heel where medals or unit patches could be secured. The placement would be subtle, visible only to those who knew to look for it, but it would serve as a constant reminder of the courage and sacrifice that the boots represented. "Remember," Miguel told her as she practiced attaching and removing the medal, "this isn't about proving anything to people who don't want to understand. It's about honoring the service of everyone who's worn boots like these, everyone who's made the choice to put others before themselves." The flight back to Chicago gave Sarah time to think about how she wanted to approach her return to school. She wasn't interested in dramatic confrontations or attention-seeking behavior. Instead, she wanted to find ways to educate her classmates about military service and help them understand that their comments about her boots reflected a lack of awareness about sacrifice and service. When she returned to Millbrook High the following Monday, Sarah noticed that her absence had been noted by her classmates. Several students asked where she had been, and she answered honestly that she had been visiting her wounded brother at a military hospital. The responses varied from genuine concern to awkward silence, but Sarah detected a shift in the way people looked at her. During her American history class, Mrs. Henderson announced that they would begin their unit on modern military conflicts with student presentations about family members who had served in Iraq or Afghanistan. Sarah volunteered to present first, knowing that her story would set the tone for the discussions that followed. "Before I begin," Sarah said as she stood in front of her classmates, "I want you to look at my boots. I know many of you have commented on them over the past few months, and I want you to understand what they really represent." The classroom was unusually quiet as Sarah began to tell Miguel's story. She described his deployment to Afghanistan, the day he was injured while rescuing trapped civilians, and the Purple Heart he had received for his courage under fire. As she spoke, she could see the expressions on her classmates' faces changing from boredom to attention to genuine engagement. "These boots," Sarah continued, lifting one foot slightly, "walked my brother through that collapsed building. They gave him stability when everything around him was falling apart. They connected him to home and family when he was scared and facing the possibility that he might not make it out alive." When Sarah finished her presentation, the classroom remained silent for several moments. Finally, Jennifer Walsh, who had been one of the most vocal critics of Sarah's boots, raised her hand. "Sarah," Jennifer said, her voice quieter than usual, "I had no idea. I'm sorry for the things I said about your boots. I didn't understand what they meant." Other students began to speak up, asking questions about Miguel's service, about military life, about the challenges facing veterans returning from deployment. Sarah found herself answering questions she had never expected to hear from her classmates, sharing insights about military families that came from years of experience with deployment, separation, and the unique pressures of military life. Madison Cooper, who had been particularly cruel in her comments about Sarah's appearance, remained quiet during the discussion. But after class, she approached Sarah privately. "My cousin is in the Marines," Madison said, looking uncomfortable but determined to speak. "He's been deployed twice, and I never really thought about what that meant for his family. I guess I never connected military service to real people, to people like you." The conversation with Madison marked the beginning of a gradual shift in Sarah's social experience at Millbrook High. Students who had previously dismissed her as weird or inappropriate began to see her as someone with unique knowledge and perspective. Teachers started referring to her when discussions touched on military or foreign policy topics. The boots that had once been sources of mockery became conversation starters that led to deeper discussions about service, sacrifice, and the meaning of patriotism. Frank Richardson, the veteran Sarah had met in her neighborhood, became a regular part of her life as she walked home from school. Their daily conversations helped her process her experiences at school and gave her additional insights into military history and culture that she could share with interested classmates. "You're doing something important," Frank told her one afternoon as they discussed her presentations and the changing atmosphere at school. "Most of these kids have never met someone who understands military life. You're building bridges between worlds that don't often connect." Sarah's confidence grew as she realized that her background, which had initially made her feel like an outsider, actually gave her valuable perspectives that could benefit her classmates and her school community. She began participating in class discussions more frequently, joining study groups, and finding ways to contribute to school projects that drew on her understanding of military culture and current events. One evening, as she was doing homework at the kitchen table, Elena noticed the Purple Heart attached to Sarah's boot. "How does it feel?" Elena asked, wearing Miguel's medal to school. Sarah considered the question carefully. "It feels like responsibility," she said finally. "Not just to honor Miguel, but to help people understand what service really means. I used to wear these boots because they made me feel connected to our family. Now I wear them because they help me connect our family to other people." Elena smiled at her daughter's response, recognizing the growth and maturity that had emerged from what could have been a difficult and isolating experience. "Your brother would be proud of how you're representing the family and the military community." That weekend, Sarah received a phone call from Miguel, who was making good progress in his recovery and preparing to transition to outpatient care. When she told him about her presentations at school and the changing attitudes among her classmates, he listened with obvious pride. "You know, Sarah," Miguel said, "when I gave you those boots, I hoped they would help you feel strong. I never imagined they would help you make other people stronger too." As Sarah prepared for another week at school, she thought about the journey she had taken from feeling embarrassed by her boots to feeling proud of what they represented. The Purple Heart attached to her heel was barely visible to most observers, but its presence reminded her daily of the courage and sacrifice that connected her to something larger than herself. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and she knew there would still be challenges ahead. Not everyone would understand or appreciate military service, and she would continue to encounter ignorance and insensitivity. But now she had tools to address those situations constructively, ways to turn moments of conflict into opportunities for education and understanding. Looking ahead, Sarah began to see possibilities for her future that she had never considered before. Perhaps she could study international relations or military history in college. Maybe she could work with veterans organizations or military families. The boots that had once made her feel different now made her feel purposeful, connected to a mission that extended far beyond high school social dynamics. As she laced up the boots Monday morning, Sarah felt the familiar weight of the Purple Heart against her heel and thought about all the steps that had led her to this moment. From Miguel's deployment to his injury to his heroism to her own journey of understanding and growth, each experience had shaped her understanding of what it meant to serve others and honor the sacrifices of those who came before. The boots were no longer just footwear or even symbols of family connection. They had become tools for building understanding, bridges between different communities, reminders that courage comes in many forms and that service to others is always worthy of respect and recognition. Spring arrived at Millbrook High with an energy that Sarah had never experienced during her time at the school. The American history presentations had sparked ongoing conversations about military service, current events, and the responsibilities of citizenship that extended far beyond the classroom. Students who had never spoken to Sarah before began approaching her with questions about her brother's recovery, her family's military background, and her perspectives on international conflicts. Mrs. Henderson had been so impressed with the engagement generated by Sarah's presentation that she invited her to co-teach a special session on military families for the entire social studies department. The invitation was both exciting and intimidating for Sarah, who had never imagined herself in a teaching role but recognized the opportunity to share important information with a larger audience. The special session was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, with students from multiple history and government classes attending. Sarah spent weeks preparing, consulting with Miguel by phone, researching statistics about military families, and practicing her presentation with her mother. She wanted to ensure that her message was both informative and respectful, honoring the experiences of military families, while helping civilian students understand realities they might never encounter otherwise. Miguel's recovery had progressed well enough that he was able to participate in the presentation via video call from his rehabilitation facility. His doctors had cleared him for limited activities, and he was eager to support his sister's educational efforts. The combination of Sarah's personal perspective and Miguel's first-hand account of military service created a powerful program that left a lasting impact on everyone who attended. During the presentation, Sarah displayed the Purple Heart for the first time publicly, explaining its significance and describing the events that had led to Miguel's injury and commendation. The medal, which had been hidden on her boot heel for months, became the centerpiece of a discussion about courage, sacrifice, and the true cost of military service. "This medal," Sarah explained to the assembled students, "represents one moment of heroism, but it also represents thousands of moments of service that no one will ever hear about. Every person who wears military boots, whether they receive medals or not, makes the choice to put others before themselves." The questions that followed the presentation revealed a genuine hunger among the students for understanding about military life. Many had family members who served but had never had opportunities to discuss their experiences openly. Others had been influenced by media portrayals of military service that bore little resemblance to reality. Sarah found herself serving as a bridge between these different worlds, helping her classmates develop more nuanced and informed perspectives. One student, David Chen, shared that his uncle had been deployed to Iraq but had never talked about his experiences upon returning home. "I always wondered why he seemed different after his deployment," David said. "Your presentation helped me understand that there might be things he went through that are difficult to talk about." After the session, several teachers approached Sarah about developing additional programs for the school. The guidance counselor suggested that Sarah might be interested in starting a support group for students from military families. The principal mentioned possibilities for connecting with other schools that had similar demographics, creating opportunities for broader discussions about military culture and civilian-military relations. These conversations planted seeds in Sarah's mind about future directions for her advocacy and education efforts. She began to see herself not just as a student trying to fit into a new school, but as someone who could make meaningful contributions to her community's understanding of important issues. The social dynamics at Millbrook High continued to evolve throughout the spring semester. Students who had previously been dismissive or cruel began seeking Sarah's input on current events projects and international relations discussions. The boots that had once been targets of mockery became symbols of respect and authority on military-related topics. Jennifer Walsh, who had apologized months earlier for her comments about Sarah's boots, approached her about collaborating on a service project to support deployed military personnel. Jennifer's change of heart had been genuine, and she was eager to find ways to demonstrate her newfound appreciation for military service. "I've been thinking about what you said during your presentation," Jennifer told Sarah one afternoon after their government class, "about how military families sacrifice along with the service members. I want to do something to help, but I don't know where to start." Together, Sarah and Jennifer developed a letter-writing campaign that connected Millbrook High students with deployed service members overseas. The project grew beyond their initial expectations, ultimately involving dozens of students and generating hundreds of letters that were sent to troops stationed in various locations around the world. The success of the letter-writing campaign led to additional service projects, including care package drives, fundraising efforts for military family support organizations, and awareness campaigns about veterans' issues. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial liaison between the school and the local military community, a role that felt both natural and fulfilling. As graduation approached for the senior class, Sarah began thinking about her own future plans. Her experiences at Millbrook High had shown her the power of education and advocacy to change perspectives and build understanding between different communities. She started researching colleges with strong programs in international relations, military studies, and education, wondering if she might combine her interests in ways that could benefit others. Miguel's recovery had progressed to the point where he was cleared to visit home for extended periods. When he first saw the changes at Sarah's school, witnessing firsthand the respect and engagement his sister had generated around military issues, he was amazed by the transformation. "I gave you those boots to help you feel strong," Miguel told Sarah during one of his visits home. I never imagined you would use them to make an entire school community stronger. The purple heart that had been hidden on Sarah's boot heel for so many months had become a symbol not just of Miguel's courage, but of the power of understanding and education to overcome ignorance and prejudice. Students at Millbrook High had learned to look beyond surface appearances, to appreciate the deeper stories and sacrifices that shaped their classmates' lives. Frank Richardson, the veteran from Sarah's neighborhood, had become a regular guest speaker at the school's military appreciation events. His friendship with Sarah had grown into a mentoring relationship that benefited both of them, giving Frank opportunities to share his experiences with younger generations while providing Sarah with historical context and wisdom from someone who had navigated similar challenges decades earlier. One afternoon in late spring, as Sarah was walking home from school with Frank after another successful presentation, he reflected on the changes he had observed over the months. "You know," Frank said, "when I first saw you wearing those boots, I could tell you were carrying something heavy, not just the weight of the leather and metal, but the weight of being different, of not being understood. Watching you transform that weight into strength, into a tool for teaching others, has been one of the most inspiring things I've witnessed in years." Sarah's response revealed the depth of growth she had experienced through her journey. "I used to think being different was something I had to apologize for or hide. Now I understand that our differences are often our greatest gifts to others. These boots taught me that." As the school year drew to a close, Sarah reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred since her first day at Millbrook High. The boots that had made her a target of ridicule had become symbols of respect and bridges for understanding. The purple heart that had remained hidden had become a tool for education and awareness. Her experience as an outsider had evolved into a platform for advocacy and service. The farewell presentation Sarah gave to Mrs. Redmond. Henderson's class captured the essence of her journey and the lessons she had learned. Standing before students who had become not just classmates but collaborators in service and understanding, Sarah shared her vision for the future. "When I first transferred to this school," Sarah said, "I thought my job was to fit in, to find ways to hide the things that made me different. I've learned that our real job is to help others understand and appreciate our differences, to build bridges between communities that might otherwise never connect." The purple heart attached to her boot heel caught the classroom lights as she spoke, a small but powerful reminder of the courage that had brought her family to this point, and the courage required to continue building understanding in a world that often seems divided. Madison Cooper, who had been transformed from tormentor to ally through the year's experiences, spoke for many of the students when she said, "Sarah, you taught us that heroism isn't just about dramatic moments in dangerous places. It's also about the daily choice to stand up for what matters, to educate rather than retreat when faced with ignorance, to use our experiences to help others grow." The final weeks of school were filled with continued service projects, ongoing correspondence with deployed military personnel, and planning for summer programs that would extend the military awareness initiative Sarah had started. The letter-writing campaign had evolved into a permanent program that would continue with new students the following year. On the last day of school, as Sarah cleaned out her locker and prepared for summer break, she encountered several students who wanted to thank her for the impact she had made on their understanding of military service and their appreciation for the sacrifices made by military families. David Chen, whose uncle had served in Iraq, shared that their family had finally begun having conversations about military service and its impact on their family. "Your presentations gave me the vocabulary and context I needed to ask the right questions," he told Sarah. "My uncle and I have started having real conversations about his experiences, and I think it's helping both of us understand each other better." Jennifer Walsh had decided to focus her college application essays on the service projects she had developed with Sarah, crediting their collaboration with teaching her about leadership, service, and the importance of supporting military communities. "You showed me that supporting the military isn't just about saying thank you," Jennifer said. "It's about taking action to understand and address the real needs of service members and their families." As Sarah walked home from school for the last time that academic year, her boots clicking against the familiar sidewalks, she thought about all the ground they had covered together. From the first day when she had felt embarrassed and isolated, through the months of gradual understanding and growing confidence, to this moment when she felt genuinely integrated into her school community, while maintaining her unique identity and perspective. The purple heart against her heel reminded her of Miguel's courage during his darkest moment overseas, but it also reminded her of her own courage in facing the daily challenges of being different, of standing up for what mattered, of transforming potential sources of shame into opportunities for education and growth. That evening, as the Martinez family gathered for dinner, Elena reflected on the changes she had witnessed in her daughter over the course of the school year. "Sarah," she said, "watching you find your voice and use it to help others understand our military family. Experience has been one of my proudest moments as a mother." Miguel, who was home for an extended visit and continuing his recovery, added his own observations. "You took the courage those boots represented and made it your own. You didn't just wear them. You made them part of your mission to serve others through education and understanding." Robert Martinez, Sarah's father, had returned from his deployment the previous month and had been amazed by the transformation he found in his daughter and her school community. During his own high school visits to speak about military service, he had seen firsthand the impact of Sarah's work and the respect she had earned from students and faculty. "What you've accomplished," Robert told his daughter, "goes beyond changing minds about military service. You've shown people that understanding and respect can grow from honest conversation, that bridges can be built between communities that seem very different on the surface." As summer began, Sarah found herself with opportunities she had never expected. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars post had invited her to speak at their Independence Day celebration. A nearby military base had asked her to participate in their Family Readiness Group program. The school district was considering implementing military family support programs, based on the models she had developed at Millbrook High. Each opportunity represented a chance to continue the work she had begun, to expand the understanding and support for military families beyond her own school community. The boots that had carried her brother through danger and courage had carried her through her own journey of growth and service. Looking ahead to her senior year, Sarah felt excited about the possibilities that lay before her. She would be returning to Millbrook High not as the outsider trying to fit in, but as an established leader, with a clear sense of purpose and mission. The boots she wore carried not just the weight of her family's military heritage, but the responsibility to continue building bridges of understanding in a world that needed them more than ever. The purple heart remained attached to her boot heel, a small but powerful reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that the choice to serve others, whether in military combat or civilian education, represents the best of human nature. Sarah Martinez had learned to wear that reminder with pride, knowing that every step she took honored not just her brother's heroism, but the ongoing possibility for understanding, respect, and service in even the most ordinary moments of daily life.